All right, folks, we made it to the end of 2024. How are we feeling?
Well, I mean, it's not quite the end of 2024 yet, but
By
I
the
mean,
time this gets uploaded, probably.
yeah, that's true. It's been an interesting year. Um, yeah, I mean, good in some ways, bad in others. Yeah, that's kind of just where the year's at. I mean, I think we've had some exciting little events at the finale of this year.
Yeah, I think I was expecting, that at least that kind of hard and fast approach of the Trump White House that's incoming wouldn't, paper over everything with the year, but I don't know how to say it, right? Like it just kind of felt like a really BS holiday season. Everyone's kind of going into New Year's to just maybe meet up with friends, but it's not. I don't know who's excited for 2025, right? But like you said, with only 2 days left in the year, we still got hit with some crazy stuff. Let's start first with the passing of former President Jimmy Carter. Um, Amid an overlaid discussion about gerontocracy, right? But it is one of the things that people were always pointing at um was about his age, especially when he was taking those pictures with Biden. um what's the discourse been surrounding his passing? Because I got my own 2 cents. I've seen a couple of things on like other sites, but
Yeah,
is
I
it
mean, it's mostly. I mean, like, he's probably one of like the least controversial major political figures to have passed away in a while. So like you're getting generally more of a focus on the positive. You've seen
mhm.
there was one. I don't know it was a more recent clip where he was talking about, kind of how Israel is basically an apartheid state with Palestine.
Mhm.
That was really making the rounds a lot. You had a lot of focus on his post presidency stuff. A few things have come out a little bit more critical of his presidency itself. There's always been kind of this debate over where he sort of falls in terms of like the kind of the neoliberal turn in this country, right? Is he responsible for it? Is it Reagan? And I think in certain ways, like I was looking at particularly a discussion of his role with I think deregulating trucking and like shipping and like domestic and one of the things that I found interesting about it is like kind of when you like look at like the rationale behind it, I think this is probably not a concept that's too hard to convince of people now with in light of Trump existing and all that. But I think some people um, I guess don't necessarily recognize how like apolitical presidents are in terms of like ideology. And I don't I think some of his, not to necessarily condone some of the more neoliberal aspects of his presidency, that, did have some lasting consequences. Um, it did, I think there's some level of like where like there wasn't like an ideological like commitment one way or the other. And it's sort of like when you have people around you that are proposing ideas that kind of make sense in the context that you're in. These individuals are more pliable to those advisors, which I mean, of course, is going to matter a lot going into 2025 with the new Trump administration and whatnot. Pretty much, like I mean, like you said, I think the big reason why no one's exactly stoked going into the new year.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think the one joke that kind of summed up the Jimmy Carter stuff to me was this man built so many houses everyone forgot he did the same things Reagan did, which is, it's a joke. It doesn't capture the full spectrum of it, but I don't know. There's the whole thing on like, do you want to categorize him as the inventor of neoliberalism because the Volcker shock happens on his watch, at his direction to some extent. But I think what's maybe more important to us, at least, from the kind of stuff we talk about here, is the class of politician he was, especially compared to Biden. And you think about it, and it's like, well, weren't they technically the same cohort? And at a point, maybe, but that was a different generation of Democrat, I'd say, right? Like, still somewhat evangelical, had a lot of these bizarre positions that just don't really prop up in contemporary Democrats.
Yeah, like they really don't like map well onto like the contemporary party at all.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like Biden to be somewhat newer, maybe like old enough to be you can tie the lineage to Carter in some way, yeah, but you know, Carter kind of comes in still at a time when political parties in the United States are regional, and I think like
Hmm.
with his passing, it's kind of it, maybe I'm the only one who's thinking this way, or maybe this is just like deep nerd shit, but like we no longer have anyone, I guess, who was alive for the transition of parties to become fully regional into fully ideological parties. Of course, there's probably people out there that are still old enough to remember that or live through that, but
Yeah, I was
among
gonna
like
say
the
you had a lot of people definitely lived through it, but I think
right,
yeah, like
right.
he is kind of rooted into like that older era a lot more so. It is kind of interesting with the Joe Biden parallel too, because I did see some people talking about like, oh, is like the second Trump administration going to give us like another Jimmy Carter type presidency, right? Because you had like, Carter emerged, of course, after Richard Nixon and like the corrupt Nixon administration. It's like, isn't that already kind of like what Joe Biden was sold as? And like, certainly like, for the longest time, Carter's presidency was remembered as a failure by and large, for various different reasons, like depending on
Mhm.
who you ask. And I was like, that's kind of where we're at exactly with Biden's legacy. I mean, it might be even made worse by the fact that I saw a report the other day that apparently he regrets dropping out because he would have won the election in his mind. So that's like just the kind of level of like delusion that we're presently dealing with.
I have seen a lot of those pieces come out. I think it's the kind of Pandora's box that's been opened from the Pod Save guys kind of revealing that the party apparatchiks always had a sense that it was never going to work out well after the fact. And I think like, there's reports of Dr. Jill encouraging Joe to burn every bridge on the way out. Um the Democratic Party, safe to say, it's not clear what their strategy is moving forward. I doubt. I mean, before we've always expressed some degree of underconfidence or suspicion about what they say they can deliver versus what they could. At this point, it's I don't know how to read them, right? Other than they don't have a good track record. Trump World, on the other hand, has been incredibly interesting to watch these past couple days.
Yeah, to say the least. I and I'll admit I don't know what the origin of this necessarily is. Like I don't know what caused it, but we've seen this real rift emerge between I guess the Doge kitchen cabinet folks, right? It's Elon and Vivek versus like the rest of like the nominal like MAGA movement. And this is specifically over H-1B immigration visas, which are one's kind of it's your work visas that are done to get people recruit sort of the best and brightest globally into the United States to work for, in their case, primarily tech companies, right? This is. I always kind of felt that type of immigration for like people concerned about like, oh, they're taking our jobs. I always thought that this aspect of immigration seemed to be kind of like oddly ignored by those folks because it's like these are the jobs that you would, nominally want as far as like pay and benefits are concerned, not, working in the cornfields. Or, I don't know, whatever the appropriate, regionally appropriate fields that, we normally associate with like illegal immigrants. But it really wasn't a major thing. But then all of a sudden, there was like this epiphany in the past couple days that like, hey, the right doesn't like this, and then Elon and Vivek come out like hard defending it, where it's like, oh no, this is important, and like the way they defended it was shockingly mask off and transparent,
Yep.
right? Like they're openly just like Elon's like, yeah, well, like Americans are dumb. Vivek says it's because of our culture. And which is like again, like who do you think like who do you think your base is? Um, but they think Americans are dumb. It's too expensive to educate Americans for this, and also there's like a bit about like, oh, if you need education, then you're already lost. So like
A
a bunch of
ridiculous thing to say,
inconsistent,
yeah.
yeah, a bunch of inconsistent positions on this. But anyways, Americans are dumb, and we can hire these foreign workers who are willing to work harder for much less. So why
I
wouldn't we do that? It's just like e- like everything that like any very like criticism you get about immigration that's like not like just blatantly racist is just like vocalized by these guys as like, yeah, we're doing this and it's good actually.
So, in the past, we've talked about um, Yankees versus Cowboys as like a way to
Hmm.
understand a former schism in the Republican Party. I don't know how to describe this. I'm not going to choose. I just can't come up with something funny to say on, on a dime for this. But having, talked to some people who were kind of anxious about like Elon Musk's extended role in governmental affairs, to then immediately see this has been like very reassuring in some ways of like these guys were always going to turn on each other. I guess I'm somewhat impressed by how quickly they were able to pull that off. But
Yeah, like not even in office yet.
right, and I think it kind of goes, and you're seeing Elon like try to quickly like pivot and show all his fans, guys, don't worry, I'm still racist, but it kind of it exposes several contradictions at the heart of conservative thought, right? And we've always been talking about this. I just didn't expect them to have to wrangle it publicly like this, and I don't know how it's going to play out. But the kind of quintessential reactionary American desire to have your cake and eat it, right? You need these jobs done. You don't want to deal with the reality of upskilling or hiring out local talent to do that. You don't want to have to pay wages that are both socially or legally acceptable to US citizens, and you find ways to exploit that as best you can. Now, of course, we, as you alluded to earlier, things like farm labor, and other sectors will rely on dubious or illegal immigration to fill that out, and will pay much lower than what's legal or ethical, right? But that is the way the United States plugs that gap, and it's an open secret in how the United States conducts its agriculture. It's the kind of thing that we've always talked about on the show, where it's like you want this produce, you want it cheap, and you don't want to be the one who picks it. So where do you think this work is being done, right? And
Right.
the H-1B visa is like, we've also talked about this on the past on the show, where it's like it is a legal path to immigration. It's not one that's an easier path to receiving citizenship. It's also not as good of a deal, at least, you know, me looking at it, right? Like, being born to immigrant parents, right? It's not nearly as good of a deal as the, the deal immigrants my parents' generation got.
Right.
So for this, and especially like the tech sector being wooed by the right after the Democratic Party failed to woo the tech sector this time around, right? And the tech sector's, leaders and big faces openly embracing this reactionary worldview, right? We're seeing the practical effect of that, where they think they have common cause with um the nationalist or populist right, whatever we're calling it these days. And what they find is their immediate interests are contradicted by that because, like we've talked about as well. Um, we don't have a vision for the future. We don't train our own people here. Um, there is interest. There are people who are qualified to do work in technology, but why pay Americans? Why put the time and energy and money into training Americans when you can import uh people from former third world nations, or specifically, as we joked about, AI being actually Indians, uh
Yeah.
right? There's that, and they have to justify their immediate interest, and they'll do it on those racist grounds, right? Which it's insane to hear them do it mask off. But it also, the third contradiction in this, to me at least, is that it goes back to that criticism we had of JD Vance, right? Where it's like this desire for a Fordist compact and this invention of multiculturalism, and which is, again, I don't want people to take that out of context from my mouth, because I sincerely believe in multiculturalism, but at some point we do have to accept that it was grafted onto the American project to make it more tenable. And as the Fordist Pact collapsed, the grafted on multiculturalism kind of went away with it. And what we get now is this bizarre brazen bullshit. But it's so funny to watch these guys fight. It's so funny to watch these guys eat shit from each other. And frankly, I I don't know why I feel relieved. I don't know why I enjoy watching it, but it's good to see these guys expose themselves on day one. I don't know.
I mean, it's like the more that they spend fighting each other, like the less time they're able to actually implement like any of their
Exactly.
agenda. So like
Exactly.
I think that's like, where we see like a path to not exactly victory, but we see at least a path to, prolonging, sort of some ill effects. And I mean it's fascinating like in a context too where you have Musk is all paranoid after like the Luigi Mangione episode. He's like
Oh boy,
bringing
I
his
didn't
kid to
even think
work
about
and
that.
everything, using a human shield, and now he's like openly like riled up like the people most willing to like take action into their own hands. Um, and it's like, and look at Mangione's politics were a little bit more right wing, anyways. So it's like you're really like pissing off the wrong crowd for your longevity, especially after you like wooed them, and in a way that like, and I think to some extent too, like people are like, what's this going to mean for like Trump, and like Trump seems to be siding with Musk and whatnot, but I don't think that his supporters. I think the fundamental miscalculation here was that Elon and Vivek bought that the Trump supporters, like that are willing to just, buy whatever bullshit Trump sells them, are not necessarily willing to do the same for anyone else. And in their case, they're certainly not willing to buy it. So I think that these two will continually face punishment for it. But I think Trump is probably in the clear. Um, as far as that, but it does sort of like it weakens that coalition in government, and there might be issues with that in terms of what they're able to secure policy wise. But it's like it's fascinating as to see them before they're even in the White House already being torn down, and like this weird like I assume it's mostly performative from Elon, where he's like, hey, like cut the racism out, guys. On X, it's like you like personally unbanned like every Nazi on this platform.
Right.
Like, I don't wanna hear it from you, and then, like, he, has been, like, on his, like, alt account, like glazing himself with it. He's just been like on a streak of some of the most pathetic things you've ever seen. Yesterday there was please post a bit more positive, beautiful, or informative content on this platform. Uh, bearing in mind that he has driven away anyone who might have been posting that content in the first place.
It, it's I think it's kind of like a bit of a trope at this point to talk about how, especially in like common sense conceptions of what fascism is, it's this ever um decreasing in group that's cutting off everyone left and right. And for these guys to really graft themselves onto like this far right Nazi flavored persona, to not immediately realize that they could be on the chopping block any second if they don't kiss the right asses. It's fun. It's funny to see them eat shit for that. It's funny to see someone get what they fucking deserve. It's still not good that this kind of reactionary sentiment is the norm, and in fact, it's it should be a bit worrying to me that racists now have to prove how racist they are to one another. That is an interesting implication of all this, but you are right that the more they waste time doing this shit, the it's a less bullshit we will have to deal with in the long run at least. But God, it is funny to see him snivel. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, you have lost your your model minority status though. That's something. I have seen. I think like it definitely has hurt Vivek, especially. I haven't seen anything from him in a minute, but I've seen posts about MAGA was actually MIGA, make India great again.
Oh my
And all of
god.
this stuff where people are very angry about this. But who knew that the real DEI was hiring white Americans all along? Um,
There it is. There it is.
hiring people who are unqualified based purely on their racial and ethnic identity. Who knew it was the white folks all along?
Everybody wants to talk about model minorities. What about the immodel majority? They don't want to talk about that.
Yeah,
They're not ready for it. I mean, with Vivek too, like it is funny to see him eat shit for this because like there is something. I can only say this from my standpoint. I need to study this to some extent. I don't know if there is scholarship on this, but like when we talk about this global populist right, and I think like not just right wing elements out of India, but specifically like what gets critiqued as like the multicultural right in the UK, or
mm,
the self insertion of like wealthy upper caste, particularly Hindus that live in the United States. So like Vivek, Kash Patel, and all these operators within the Trump club or within the Republican circles. Um, I know how these guys act. I've seen this play a bajillion times, and it's this deep seated insecurity and desire to like put yourself on equal footing with white people as soon as you can, either because you're afraid of the violence you harbor for others being done to you, or because you're delusional enough to think that supremacy in that context is something you deserve or should ever want. And for those guys to eat shit, it is personally vindicating in some way to see like people who do that horrible stuff kind of get dressed down for it. But it's what I keep saying in practice is like if you want to join this ever decreasing in group, be ready for your fucking turn to get kicked out and have that violence done on you. That is the logic of fascism. And if you don't think it's your turn for that to happen, buddy, you're not ready. You're not gonna make it.
yeah. And we'll have to delve, I think, probably more into this topic in the future as it's become more prevalent. The rightward shift of the quote unquote home of progressives, TYT, because
Oh boy.
Cenk Uyghur
Oh
inserted
my.
himself into the civil war. And for
Oh
someone who's been
no.
making a lot of hay about how like we need to ally ourselves with the quote unquote populist right, the fact that he at the first opportunity has opted to side with Elon Musk, I think shows that the reality is that we're looking for a paycheck, or at least he is. Um,
Again, you can get in that club and try to get your paycheck as much as you want. It's not going to pan out.
yeah,
It's again, I'm so surprised that people can get. I mean, then again, I'm doing this right now, but people can get on a hot mic or a live camera and like debase themselves into saying all that shit and expect nobody to remember something they said the day before, if not years before, right? So it's absurd. Yeah, the
one
Young Turks
final
deep
thing.
dive.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like I know other people are doing it too, but it's like it's one of those things where it's like it's a I don't even, I mean, you would know our marketing stuff better than I would. I mean, do we even like use the label progressive for anything? Does anyone use that anymore?
I was just about to ask you that because like the term progressive and how that has been nebulous, barely defined, co-opted and bent out of shape 1,000 times over. I think the only person who still says it is Bernie Sanders of all people, believe it or not. So
Which is still, I mean, it still matters. I think for like the movement ostensibly. Um, but like that's like where it's like as I said with like the TOT stuff. It's like for having that large platform, and I think really just kind of the brazen shift that they're undergoing, I think is like deeply frustrating. And as much as like I think that their analyses for a while have been primitive at best,
yeah,
um, and to outright horrible in some cases, right? But increasingly of the latter branch. I mean, it's still like that they've got the numbers. I mean, maybe increasingly less so, but they've got they're still one of the larger networks, sort of in this space, at least nominally, and like them kind of like going in that direction is problematic in as far as I think it can lead other people in that direction, right? Like, it's like sometimes people will kind of just like, they'll smell the bullshit and leave, but other times they won't, and that's why it's frustrating, to say the least.
absolutely. And I think like TYT is not the only space that's happened in. Like people have observed this in other spaces. Like
Sure.
again, like just an example that comes to mind, right? And this is a complicated one because it's just something that has to be wrangled with. Like Norman Finkelstein, again, excellent work on Palestine, on Israeli ideology. His work is formative, and everything he's done to speak out against Israel's atrocities. I get it, very good. But I kind of got the sense that he wasn't doing well financially a couple months ago, and was briefly on the anti woke, anti trans train, and that
Yeah.
was a very disappointing thing to watch.
And I think that's been an easy enough like train for like because I mean that was kind of where TIWT started this like shift, right? It was
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
on that. Where and I mean on some level I get it in the sense that like there was a time where I would have probably said that I generally I viewed myself more fiscally or economically more liberal than socially. But like those issues aren't they're not like separated like that. The more you like have awareness of it, and you should have an awareness of those issues if you're going to be talking to tens of thousands of subscribers every day, and all you do all day is talk about politics. I would like to think you would know a thing or two about them. Um, and like those issues are interlinked, and like I don't think that the solution, even if you do see them as separate, there's no proven track record of like, well, if we just jettison like trans people like entirely, it's like one thing to like maybe de-emphasize the issue, and it's another to like be like, yeah, actually, JK Rowling's right, or whoever, with whatever turf or more bigoted anti-trans folk is like, it's another thing to go in that direction, and that's increasingly what we've been seeing from some of those folks.
Yeah, and I think this is where and we've talked about this on the past. I think it's going to be something we're going to have to continue to work on in the coming year, right? Is understanding media as a market, understanding market incentives behind political media, and what that drives, both in terms of what content is produced, as well as what kind of discourse is encouraged or produced from that, as well as any impacts that has on politics thereof, right? So I I had something profound there, and then I kind of lost my thread. But no, but it's just again, like how does something like okay, I caught my thread. It's like the Young Turks is, if you look at their programming schedule, it's like 12 hours a day, if I'm not mistaken, or at least like a very extended period of time.
Yeah, it's long.
Right. So it's like I kind of just see them taking the CNN model of like, how do you get the news going? Well, you have something that's like an ongoing tragedy
You got to
like
become the news on some level.
right. It's like, you got to become like the Challenger explosion. You got to have 9/11 happening, because that's the shit that, gets ratings up. That's the shit that gets people watching the news. That's what gets advertisers buying ad space, right? And I think, that's the unfortunate trend, as transphobia, as reactionary sentiments. Like, a lot of these things are linked, or at least if they're not linked, you can see patterns, or you can see them in aggregate, where panic sells news media more effectively than nuance ever can, right? And we can safely blame Reagan for, killing the fairness doctrine. We can blame the several figures behind right wing media, in particular, for enabling this kind of behavior.
Mhm.
But it's yeah, panic sells. And I think like with something like transphobia, you have this near infinite cash crop of media to just keep putting out there. And as long as people remain rabidly transphobic, this is another tool. And the it doesn't even feel good to say that, because like this is actually damaging people's lives, and
Mhm.
we don't have an answer for it. I don't know.
And it's not like, there's not even like a real sense of like transactional politics going on either, right? It's not like, oh, hey, well, like, we threw trans people under the bus, but hey, now we all have universal health care, right? It's like you're not gaining anything from it. You're not getting like cred in right wing circles that they're going to like pay you back with. Um, and not that would necessarily justify it, but like that would at least, you could at least somewhat understand, right? It's like, well, like, hey,
Right.
yeah, like, you have to deal with bigotry, but like at least your material conditions are a little better. It's like, no, like there's we're just like giving the right free ammunition for nothing, for like a couple seconds of attention.
Absolutely. And I think that, as precarity seems to be the defining problem of the day, right? Like if you take every man on the street interview about what people are dealing with when it comes to like prices, when it comes to
Hmm.
housing, all this, like the overarching theme really is precarity, that people cannot predict safely what their outcomes are going to be. People cannot predict, in spite of how hard they work, will they have enough to bring back. And in that condition, especially when we're encouraged to take it out on one another instead of point fingers on at, who may be responsible more accurately,
Yeah.
um Scapegoating is the answer to that, and it will continue to be the case as long as people remain precarious and people are encouraged to act and think selfishly. So will grifting. Grifting will also increase.
Yeah.
Now, I did come up with this outline on, very fast and loose. I don't really have a clean way to transition that.
Well, I did want one final note before
Yes,
we
yes,
wrap
yes.
up all that. Um, kind of, perfectly bookending Jimmy Carter and like Trump stuff. Because of Carter's passing, flags will be flown at half mast for like the next 30 days, which means they'll be
That is
flown at
true.
half mast in the U.S. Capitol on Trump's inauguration, um, which feels appropriate.
That I didn't even I didn't even realize that. Holy shit.
Yeah, I joked that I was like, right, it's because of Jimmy Carter's death. That's why they're being flown at half mast.
I mean that is the sense, right? Where it's just like what the fuck are we celebrating, guys? Like I've been feeling like that for a long time, like Thanksgiving onwards, but exactly like the inauguration is going to be another. I'm just seeing a playthrough of I had the biggest crowds of anybody all over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because as someone who's been teaching this stuff for the past couple years now, um, I know a lot of my students have kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They weren't familiar with some of like the ins and outs of like the Trump things, right? Like some of these were kind of minor scandals, Sharpie Gate, um, you know. He's a hero because he was captured. I prefer heroes who weren't captured. Just all of the greatest hits of the Trump administration, and it's like, as someone cursed with knowledge, I don't know if I'm going to be built living my best or worst life for the next 4 years. We shall see.
The other thing I'm thinking now, just as you said that, is like Trump really lowered the bar for what's like, or is it maybe how do I say this? Because everything was a scandal with him, and
Oh yeah,
I'm not even saying that to make fun of like the liberal media. Like I'm saying that because like he always had his hand in the cookie jar in some fucking way, right?
right.
Like
Like I mean, even like the RussiaGate stuff, right? Like it's become like a meme, but like no, like actual messed up stuff was happening there.
it's like you had that, you had his lawsuits, yeah, just so many freakish things just tied to him.
Yeah,
And then you bring his like staff into it and like the various cases they're dealing with. Like it was an administration surrounded in scandal, right? So I don't know like if the bar for what's a scandal under Trump is going to be raised or lowered.
I have no clue what it will be. It'll be some interesting. I don't know. I think it won't take very long before we're having that question answered. The real question will be like, at what point have we reached like sort of the zenith of it, rather than like where can things go wrong?
Yep. Yep. So on the subject of things that did go right this year, um, this is I just had I was figuring like what's something positive we can probably end with for this year. And surprise, surprise, it is another mech content review. We still will. I don't know when we're gonna have the Seed Freedom episode out. Who knows? I kind of feel like I need
This
to
one
finish
will be less
watching.
positive. I'll be upfront.
I kind of feel like I need to watch Victory before I do that too, because I was telling you about this, and I think I'm gonna stick by it. Although maybe when the motorcycle vehicles start popping in, my mind might be changed. But I
Then
just
you'll be
get this
wondering why didn't Seed rip this off?
right. But like yeah, just like I'm seeing like a lot of these like animation details and like these like stylistic choices that I'm like did Seed see these like 5 to 10 episodes and like try to like hyper condense that aesthetic into like the 2004 thing it was trying to do while trying to rehash UC? I don't know, but like
Yeah, and
especially with the
like
mech designs, I see it.
yeah, like when you mentioned, I was like looking up at my my shelf right above my desk actually, and I've got a technically it's the second Victory Gundam, but I've got my Victory Gundam up there, and I'm like looking at them. I'm like, yeah, I could see where they just stole that part on used it on the strike, made it a little less curvy, more edgy, like not like edgy like like ugh, I hate kids, like edgy is in
Like
sharper
this,
edges on the
yeah, yeah.
actual like.
But even things like the beam shields, and then like especially like the Zanscare mobile suits, I'm looking at that. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
that's
That
too
stuff was
big.
blatantly stolen in Sea Destiny.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Like they didn't even like really try to make the beam shield even look different.
Not
And
at
then like
all.
the way the Victory combines, it's the same way the Impulse does.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So yeah, maybe in the coming year, look out, Cosmic Era fans, all 5 of you. We will have our review for that. Um, but Transformers One, this was a surprising sleeper hit. It was so under the radar. I didn't even know about it until like the last week of screening.
oh,
Um,
okay. I guess I didn't realize it was quite that late with you.
yeah, but like when I saw it, and especially like compared to like 2023 when we had like these mega epic films, and like it seemed like Hollywood was back, especially after the pandemic, and there was this renewed interest in like, if not more experimental or like art house stuff with A24. There was this interest in like historical epics with like Oppenheimer, Napoleon, all that stuff.
Hmm.
So for 2024 to be like a more quaint year for film was kind of disappointing. And
Yeah, I
I
was
thought,
like trying to like go through like the films I had watched this year, and I was like, I don't think I've really seen a whole heck of a lot. And like some of the stuff I was like listing, I was like, that definitely didn't come out this year. But it just happened to be when I saw it.
right, like I think the biggest thing this year is like what the film adaptation of Wicked, and I'm not really a musicals guy, so like I can't speak for that, but like Transformers 1, I thought me and Sky, let's go watch it, it'll just be like nice, easy watching.
Yeah, nice popcorn movie.
Nice popcorn movie, and then I'm like, oh, this is because especially like trying to explain Transformers lore to my fiance, like we'll have like the stupid ass questions like, oh, okay, do Transformers have sex? What's the thing? Like, or like down to like, so why are the Autobots and the Decepticons fighting? And it's like because there was a war on Cybertron. And then she'd be like, "No, this is too much lore." And I'm like, Trust me, I'll get into it with you one
Well,
day."
what's
Then we
funny
watch.
is like the lore is like it's one of those brands that has been like almost every iteration is like a reimagining, right?
Yeah,
And a
yeah,
lot of them don't really have particularly heavy lore, right? It's just like the Autobots and Decepticons are fighting because they are. Where it's like, yeah, if you go to the original source material, it's like, okay, well, there's like, they're strapped for resources. They're, like, it's like, it's deep. It's like shockingly deeper than I think even the writers necessarily intended in certain cases.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And especially like in the case of Gundam, right? Like compared to Transformers, I
mhm.
promise, like this is gonna go somewhere, right? It's like Tomino has this interview where it's like, I was just making a mech anime. The primary audience was actually intended to be girls, and it wasn't until like the toy guys got in, especially like once like Gunpla like really kicked off,
Yeah.
that male fans came in. And he would always joke that like, the boys are late to the party on this one. But then with Transformers, like the Diaclone action figure line kind of comes in before any of these cartoons come into
Mhm.
play. And the cartoon's more of like a thing after the fact to sell the figures. I promise I have so many ideas for like crazy audio documentaries, and one of them is like mecha as a genre. That might be
That'd be
too
awesome.
That would be awesome, but it's very ambitious to get into that. But yeah, it's like you might think of it as like, okay, this is just to move product, especially if you watch like the Michael Bay films.
Oh yeah.
And Transformers 1 is kind of like a wink and a nod to be like, hey, this is a thoughtful but very entertaining animated film, but for all of the true fans who've been watching, or if you grew up with it, here's everything you thought you would ever want in a Transformers movie, which I'm befuddled by.
Yeah, it was definitely like a sleeper hit, right? It was one of those movies that like wasn't particularly well marketed. There was a guy on Twitter, I think his current handle is still TF1 hype guy, who like just made it his mission to just spam people. But like, I mean, it wasn't like spamming like the same people, but he was just posted constantly like on like different threads, and like particularly because Joker 2 was out at the exact same time. A much from everything I've heard, a disastrous movie, but one I could not have been bothered to watch.
Right.
But like, and it just became a meme because everyone was talking about like, oh, Joker 2 sucks, or oh, I'm going to see Joker 2, and he's like, go see TF1 instead. And then like, eventually, people were like, hey, I took this guy's recommendation, and he's absolutely right. This movie rocks. And then there were some bigger content creators. I don't know if you're familiar with Cosmonaut Variety Hour.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I used to watch his
but
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, his Joker 2 one was like basically just like, yeah, psych, this is actually like a sleeper Transformers 1 video because um, I wanted to get more views, and we're actually going to spend half the video talking about this and how much of a better movie it is and everything like that. And I've started to see this make like circulation rounds again with the Lion King prequel as well, because like someone's like, hey, if you want to see a movie about like, two brothers like, having a clash of ideology and go and fighting, he watched TF1 instead. Um so it's just like it's like the weird like answer to like, hey, I'm really dissatisfied with like what I'm watching. What should I do instead? And the answer, I guess for this year, at least, is watch Transformers 1.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm just reading my outline aloud for the audience. I have Mech Media and Transformers. Where are we on it? The second bullet point is autism. Um,
I don't even know what you were going at with
I don't
this.
know what I was gonna go with this. I don't know. Like, I did. I have this very visceral memory. I don't know why I feel comfortable trauma dumping this on the mic for our listeners, but um I just remember like having this like I always just grew up like always down with like anything mecha. I would love watching like anime or stuff about it. And as men with undiagnosed autism growing up are bound to do, you have an absurd amount of action figures. And
Sure.
I think like this is the early days of like being like in middle school with a Facebook account, and like for whatever reason I thought it was a good idea to like while being bullied post like my Transformers collection, and I
Ooh.
ate shit for like a whole month. It's like I was just like I don't know, to this moment I was just scared of like should I even do this? And I'm like who cares? Just like cuz like that's the whole point of it as a film is like yeah, you think it's to move product. What's actually going on is like very interesting commentary on like um rebellion and fissure and conflict within rebellion.
Yeah.
You also have just like very well done animation at a time when like animation quality has been dropping, as well as the animation industry getting a bit more unsustainable with delivering quality stuff. So
Yeah.
for them to take this like art deco style and like push it technically was really interesting. I think a lot of people, especially growing up with Transformers media, like you never see Cybertron. The war is always on Earth. So to have something with Cybertron's like a fleshed out planet, you have the Quintessons as like this alien race in the background, and they're really
Hmm.
intimidating for like 5 minutes. But then to see it as like, no, it's corruption, a corruption tale at play.
Yeah, like where it's like their role is like they're kind of the overarching villains, but like the real conflict is within.
Right, right.
There's more than meets the eye to the conflict, is
There
what
you
I'm trying to
go.
say.
There, you said it. He said it. Oh my god. So I guess, and this is like not exactly part of any continuity per se, but I guess if it fits anything directly, probably Gen 1.
Uh, no. Um, Gen 1 has Generation 1's kind of weird where like I mean there's a
Yeah.
million Generation 1 continuities, but if we're like the main split is like cartoon and comics, right?
Hmm.
So the original cartoon, the Quintessons are the creators of the Transformers. If you follow with some real deep lore, with the Japanese continuity of stuff made years and years later, it turns out that like the whole universe was like created in like this really convoluted roundabout way. I'm not going to get into that. Um, but the comics had the lore that was a little bit more reflective of like the origin story here, where you have like Primus as like the creator god of the Transformers. The Quintessons I think existed in the Marvel comics, but they were like they were
Yeah.
kind of like iffy on using stuff from the original like '86 movie. Like most of the characters that were in it came about through like time travel as opposed to just like the actual advancement of the plot that that movie represented.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is like it's heavily like pulling from a lot of stuff that's like been in the Transformers like mythos for a long time. The whole original 13 Prime concept is something that has been around since I want to say it wasn't in Armada, but around that time was when it was created as like sort of part of the origin story lore, and that was obviously important for this movie. So it was kind of nice seeing like, especially with like how the Bayverse movies like always tried to stray away from like kind of well, until the end, strayed away from like the more like fantastical and supernatural. It was kind of nice to see them go like, yeah, like we're doing the lore that I always was really into as a kid. Like, I mean, back
Yeah.
when like the original 13, like we knew like two of them. Um, and like that was like all we knew, and it was like, oh, like who are the rest of the members? And then like Cybertron introduced Vector Prime, who like showed up in this movie for like 2 seconds and looked exactly like he did in that show, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
So like it was cool seeing like this pull from all over the place. It also pulls a lot of inspiration from some of the IDW comics that they did, particularly their first continuity, which ran from like I want to say 2005 ish through 2017, roughly. So that those were around for a while, but they dealt with a little bit more of like kind of like those heavier political concepts, in particular with the origins of like the Decepticons and the Autobots. Um, so that's kind of like where this fits in. It's its own thing, but it's like heavily referential to like other pieces of lore, and and in that way, right? It makes it so like it's rewarding as a long term fan to watch, but also not like if you're, you know, Sky, you can go into this movie without feeling like holy shit, like you have to like drop decades worth of lore on me to like make anything out of it.
Oh my god, yeah. And it's, like she watched it, like it was probably like the scenes where like Megatron and Optimus are really like fighting it out, and like Megatron's villain like arc is kind of completed.
Hmm.
Um, or even like there's that really like tense scene where it's like you didn't just betray Cybertron, you betrayed me. Like she was tearing up at that, and I'm just like, yo, this is Transformers. It's like, but like it was done that well, and I think the
Yeah,
other thing that's in addition to just how beautifully animated this one was, you had a very star-studded cast for this. I think a lot of
yeah,
former Marvel heavyweights made it into this one. Um, and were able to kind of shed their Marvel skin of it and kind of just deliver authentic performances straight up. You also have
Yeah,
Brian Tyree Henry as Megatron. Amazing job with that. Oh my god.
yeah, I didn't really know what to expect from him either, and I was like, "Wow, that was really good." And like Transformers isn't really a stranger to. I didn't realize that Brian. I didn't realize he was the dad in Spider Verse. To be honest,
Yeah, yeah,
it's not what I knew him from. I mean, I've seen those movies, but I was like, "Wait, that's what he's from." Or that's what he was in. But yeah, like it's you know, Transformers is no stranger to having, like the celebrity casting and whatnot. I mean, way back to the original series. I mean, you had Orson Welles voice Unicron. Um,
right.
Leonard Nimoy was Galvatron in the movie. You had a lot of stuff like that. So like it definitely like it fit here, and I think that like for a while now, people have been like really, I think, like cynical towards like the celebrity casting in animated movies, where like hire like real act like voice actors and whatnot. And I generally agree, but like here it worked. I think everyone did a really good job.
It did, and I also think like because of not just the work that they put in, there was also like a stylistic choice, especially for Chris Hemsworth as Optimus Prime, or
Yeah,
for Brian Tyree Henry as Megatron, to kind of, as they get deeper into the character, they start to mirror the original voice actors. So
yeah,
Chris Hemsworth almost comes off like Peter Cullen at the end. You have like Brian Tyree Henry like almost pulling off like Frank Welker's like kind of gravelly sneer, and then even like there's a the one that like was the most well done was like Starscream with Steve Buscemi, and then like Megatron is just loves breaking like people's vocal processors. So like the minute he like chokes out Starscream, suddenly he gets the classic Gen 1 voice. And I think, was it Tom Kenny who did
yeah.
that voice?
Was it
SpongeBob
what?
himself. SpongeBob himself.
So for the who? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was good. Or are you talking about the original Starscream voice?
The original Starscream voice I think was Tom Kenny, right?
No, 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 no. Tom Kenny voiced him in animated.
Oh, my
He
bad, my bad, my
was
bad.
uh Chris Latta,
Okay, okay.
who's not like he's kind of known more for like I think he did some like mafia movies and stuff back in the day, but
Okay.
like yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, even
but
like
yeah,
from
like
a
the with
voice.
the crushed it had the same like G1 voice filter when he
Yeah. Yeah, because it's kind of like people talk about like, oh, get voice actors in the room, but it's like without a voice director, it kind of falls flat.
100%, yeah, and I said, like, I mean, it worked here. I mean, you had I mean, Keegan Michael Key as Bumblebee. I did not
Amazing
expect the
job. Amazing job.
when he first shows up and like he's like in like because he's been isolated working in like a smelter for who knows how long, and he's kind of crazy, and then he's like introducing them to his friends, quote unquote, which were just like piles of scrap that he like
Right.
anthropomorphized. And the I did not expect the Aatron reference. I'm like, man, like, is this movie like? Because it's like, I mean, like me, like I took my brother and cousin with me. We all like laughed hysterically because like we knew the Michael and
The Key and
you know,
Peele reference. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the Key and Peele skit, but like the kids had no idea. And it was like, and granted, I was at a special showing, so there wasn't that many kids, but it was just like it was like weird where I'm like, is this movie's audience like me? Um, or is it like, who is the broader audience they're shooting for?
I think it was definitely like the older audience that, if not people who know like some of the voice actors, like people who
Yeah.
grew up with Transformers or like watched some of it growing up.
Well, then obviously, yeah, like the rest of like, the political stuff too. I was like, man, this really feels like it was a tailor made for one in a lot of cases. But I mean, everyone. I mean, I again, it's gotten generally pretty heavy praise.
Yeah, I think it does what a lot of films like it don't do, in that one, it doesn't overstay its welcome, but it doesn't leave anything to chance. So it's like,
Yeah.
why can't the miners in this case transform? It's because that was taken from them, and it's like, for them to liberate themselves, they have to literally find the tools to transform and all that stuff. Um, you also just have like, are they willing to go there? Yes, they are. Now, Transformers, for those who've never seen it, can get crazily violent at points. So for them
Yeah,
to like have D16 like literally like hack does he hack him to death or does he cut his head off? I don't remember.
Sentinel.
Yeah.
He just rips him in half.
He just rips him in half, right? Like so for something like brutal like that, like that's classic Megatron shit. But for someone who's like was just expecting this to be like a kids film, like no, no.
One, it doesn't help like right before that, he blasts like a hole through Optimus, like just his whole arm's missing. After that, and like that's his best friend is his brother basically, and then he just like lets him die, and like you get that like really awesome like juxtaposition as he's like as he becomes Megatron and Orion Pax becomes Optimus. In that moment, like that was like a really well done, and obviously, yeah, it's a very violent in its execution.
Yeah, and I think there's that element too of like becoming who you were meant to be element. The hero's journey being expressed visually like that, right?
Yeah.
So as they gain their cogs and their ability to transform, they also start to look more like the classic characters.
Hmm.
But then also like it kind of builds on the theme, right? Where these are inherently ordinary people, well, ordinary Cybertronians in this case, right? Who are driven to extreme circumstances by like the powers that be. So I think it's kind of prescient that they could pull that off in a Transformers movie, especially, in our American environment of like controlled opposition, controlling discontent, to kind of
Yeah.
have, you know, point blank, yeah, when people are driven to these circumstances, they will act. Some for good reason, some for bad. And like even the Decepticons to whatever extent, like they're kind of just always been the quintessential cartoon villain. For
Hmm.
them to kind of be seen as like somewhat sympathetic, right? Where it's like Megatron is literally having his entire worldview destroyed. Like I like we've talked about like the crisis of faith when your civic religion is broken down.
Yeah. It's
Like
literally
yeah, yeah,
to a
like he
T.
literally to a T is like his entire worldview and conception of not just self, but his entire society is broken in like 24 hours. So he decides, okay, all the other exiled royal guards, we're the Decepticons now. Fuck it, we're just gonna run shit. Obviously, that's not what he says, but like that's the direction they went. And
Yeah.
his was like, yeah, no, we'll do this brutally. And then you have Optimus Prime in the same vein, experiencing the same things, being like, hold up, we're not just gonna free everybody, we're not just gonna liberate people and like give them their power back before. Aren't we gonna set some standards on like what our justice is gonna look like? And then for him to choose at that moment, like, because it's like, why are like Optimus Prime and Megatron are these like eternal rivals? What started that? And it was a decision to like be like, I cannot fight you. You broke my heart type shit, right?
Yeah.
Well fucking played. Well fucking played.
For sure. Yeah. It was. Yeah, and in essence, it's they've kind of been, as in the past few years, like some of the comics, they've been kind of playing with kind of a more sympathetic origin for the Decepticons. Here, obviously, it was kind of that this the miners, obviously, only in the movie, only D16 joins them, but like the High Guard, it's right, they were sort of exiled from Grace, but like he was, basically a slave, and other miners that will presumably join them were basically slaves, based on at least their character designs looking a lot like other Decepticons. So I would assume that that's where they're gonna wind up ultimately. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the IDW comics that I mentioned as well, that were kind of, I think, where some of the groundwork was laid for a lot of this stuff. Their Megatron creates the Decepticons kind of for the same reason. But in that case, it wasn't that they couldn't transform, it was that like society like determined like the functionality of your alt mode was what you were locked into. So, like, if you had a useless alt mode, you were a useless person who was not allowed any, like, rights or privileges in society.
Right.
Or if you had, like, hey, you turn into a drill, you are a miner the day until you have your final breath, or whatever a a robot has. Um,
So your spark is out.
yeah, and there's been some interesting debates over like within the fandom in terms of these types of origins. Like, does is making the bad guys former slaves? Is that appropriate? I don't know. I prefer the nuance that it adds, if anything.
I mean, it is interesting you bring that up because, like, I know they said that they use the Art Deco aesthetic in the film to like play well with the mechanical designs. It just
Yeah, but now, yeah, I didn't make this connection at first, but yeah.
right, but like now that I'm thinking about it, and like I'm sure the create if the creators of the film heard this, they'll be like, "No, we didn't intend this. Shut the fuck up." Um, it's like because Art Deco is often associated with like the heyday of the United States
Yeah, the
pre
Gilded
Great
Age.
Depression. Yeah, the Gilded. It is like the calling card of the Gilded Age, and like I think right up to the Great Depression, Art Deco like um is kind of seen as this like, especially like, have you ever run into like right wing architecture bros?
Admittedly, I never have. I mean,
Okay,
it doesn't shock me that they exist, but
or even just anybody complaining about brutalism.
a little bit, yeah.
Okay, so you've seen the size, like Art Deco tends to be their next favorite style, next to like just like them jacking off to like Roman columns and shit. But like, but the comparison isn't lost on me because it's like here you have like Art Deco as like this calling card of a bygone age, and like if you think about this in like the context of Transformers lore, like the next event is like the war for Cybertron, where
Yeah,
like the fully formed Autobots and the fully formed Decepticons are going to fight this out. And then at the same time, it's like for them to be former slaves who like kind of rebuild and reform the society out from under them or form these like militant factions. It does give like the Roman ages, where like it was a slave society and you had these
hmm
like rags to riches characters who would become major players within their societies. So I'm sure I'm just projecting, but like the comparison isn't lost, especially for the film, for history, and then just for like the archetypical hero's journey, right?
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't totally shock me if it was deliberate, to be honest. Just because, like, yeah, it does fit so perfectly with what they're otherwise doing.
For sure. Um, I did put this point in the outline, this being a soulful adaptation in an era of soulless films. I mean, not that I have like a framework for like what makes an adaptation good versus what makes an adaptation bad, but like to me, like I guess the golden ideal would be like something that can stand on its own, but like brings back feelings of looking at what it's inspired by.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, my bad, my bad. Just like a good adaptation can stand on its own, but like isn't like it'll bring back the warm feelings you had when with the source material, right?
Yeah, like it should be something that, like, I mean, it should there should be something there for new and returning audiences.
Exactly. And I think just like as we talk about adaptations and reboots um being the place where Hollywood is stuck these days, it is nice to see this like work.
Yeah. And again, I mean, it wasn't necessarily the most commercially successful movie that came out this year, which, maybe that is why things work the way they do in Hollywood, sadly. But
Yeah.
yeah, like, I mean, from an audience perspective, like, it's a win. And like I'm trying to think of like the last like reboot like thing that I saw that I was like, yeah, this is clearly exactly what you're talking about in terms of like what it's not. But like, yeah, I mean, I don't think you can say that. I think most people can think of at least something, or at least the idea of that generally being true.
For sure. Let's see. I don't have any other specific pieces here. I guess any other favorite scenes you had, or any other notes?
It kind of like it ties up again back to that like climax because it's become relevant in the real world. When D16 becomes Megatron, he sort of adopts that the rise up phrase, which was first kind of Sentinel had said it to him jokingly or like insultingly at first, but now it's become their like rallying cry. And that's kind of existed in the lore for a little bit now. Animated is actually where that like transform and rise up came from. There it was just because they could fly, not it wasn't intended as a political gesture. But it's something that I was like, man, like that it goes hard as like a political slogan. And especially after the election, I was like, maybe we should use it. But in South Korea, they already are using it.
Yeah, yeah.
There was, I am sure there's more of these, but I saw two signs where someone had, and they were different. It wasn't like so you've got one of the Decepticon logo, rise up, one of the like sloppy brand that D16 is given by Sentinel Prime in the movie. As well, and like people are using it as like a symbol of protest there. I don't admittedly know the ins and outs of what happened in South Korea. Like I know like martial law was declared and then pretty quickly suspended. But I don't know like anything about the build up to that moment. Um, but it is interesting seeing the politics of this movie, which already did have parallels with historical and frankly present moments. Seeing it actively invoked in political protest is quite the sight to behold.
Yep, yep. Can confirm. So, I mean, this definitely was one of the gems to come out this year. I forgot what our rating system is. I think we're doing them out of 5, right?
I want to say yes.
Yeah, let's say
I hope we
let's
are.
say 5. Let's say 5 this
Yeah,
time. I think this one gets a solid 4.
yeah. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go 4.5.
That's fair.
I
That's very
think.
fair.
I really enjoyed this one. I've been my fandom for Transformers is like really kind of like catapulted in the past few years. Like I haven't posted pictures of my collection to share with all my bullies, but
Smart move. Smart
I
move.
do have quite a few. I almost did for the episode, but I couldn't get the lighting was fucked up in my room. But I do have next to my desk in my condo, I've got a one of those IKEA glass shelves, and it's actually filled with just my Megatrons currently. So
Oh man.
the fact that there's enough of one character in my collection, who does look substantially different in various incarnations, for those who are not as initiated, I think conveys something about my affinity.
There's probably a joke in there somewhere about how like Optimus Prime kind of looks the same no matter what.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I have many Optimuses too, but like, yeah, he tends to.
Most often just tends to be a red truck, but then like Megatron has been like 1,000 things over.
And like very often a completely different color scheme. Like with
Different personality, different origin
yeah,
story.
yeah. Whereas I mean, Optimus occasionally you get some different origin stories. Occasionally you go from more fatherly figure to more military commander, but that's kind of the spectrum roughly. Like occasionally you get the younger one, like you get in this movie. But yeah, like definitely less variance there. I mean, there was a joke where like someone had posted like almost all of the major incarnations, and they're like, it's shocking that like the Armada design, which was supposed to be like the return to normalcy after Beast Wars, is like the most different looking Optimus in the bunch, just because instead of having, truck boob windows, he has a truck grill on his chest.
That's that's gonna be a probably a pivotal moment in whatever mecha audio documentary we do, because like just everything around like the 2000s, like Bush era mech stuff was if you just look at the two big players like Gundam and Transformers, like it is billed as this return to normal where they try to rehash an old plot, they try to bring back
Yeah,
old designs, but they try to give it like this modern flair and like these new animation techniques. And what they come up with is like something that can never be returned to. I don't even mean that in a bad way necessarily, but it's like something that like we just could what would probably be the entire thing we talked about if we did a Seed Freedom episode is like they brought back something that could only exist in 2004 in 2024.
yeah,
Like, and like that's the thing, like why wouldn't there be another like Armada rehash or like the designs of the Transformers in that era? It's like
sure.
they were trying to redo this like Gen 1 style, and what they pulled off effectively was like the craziest conception of Transformers. Like, and then there have been some pretty wild ones, but I
Yeah.
don't think we're ever gonna see mini cons ever again. I don't know.
Um, they sprinkle them in, but
They sprinkle them in.
they've never been like as much of a fixture like there, where and like that's somewhat of a sort of the demands of the toy market as well.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
can't exactly afford to include a actually pretty decently decent little figure on top of your action figure that does all these little functionality, activates different things and whatnot. Like, I mean,
Right.
some of those older ones, like even like the deluxe classes, or I think they were called something slightly different for MegaCon or something for Armada, whatever it was. Um, but like, I mean, some of those, it's like they go pretty hard, like,
Yeah.
and like there's just like, oh yeah, like this little minicon that he came with, you've basically got like a whole playset with just that and the bigger robot because of how much they can interact together.
Which was also the appeal, like stuff with Energon, because like they could literally like combine with each other. So for every
Yeah.
figure you had, like you had a new combo to make. But
Yeah, I finally got like the second half of one of the combinations, and this year actually, and I was like, wow, like this is what I've been missing out on. Like this is actually
no
pretty
way.
awesome.
That's sick. That's sick. It's also just crazy because like you trying to explain this to somebody who just doesn't know about. Like I guess the thing we sit next to in the anime space is probably like kaiju like fandom.
Yeah,
I guess, and it's like
I
I'm
mean it's
not
weird
opposed.
because like that, like I mean a little bit, but like there's not like kaiju's more like a little closer to like the more live action stuff, like the
Yeah,
tokusatsu, like your
Tokusatsu and
Sentai
all
and all
that.
that
Yeah,
stuff. Like that's a little bit, but yeah, I guess it's like sort of adjacent in that space.
that is true. Yeah, so it's like I don't know. Like with mech stuff, it's like it is crazy how the product that's the story is at the whim of like the merch department to varying degrees. So like something like I don't know, Evangelion for example, like the merch market for it is huge but is not directly tied to the media at all. Stuff like Gundam where it's like half in, half out,
Yeah,
and then like Transformers where like it's literally in lockstep.
um, sort of. In the recent years, there's been more of a split where it's like you
Okay.
had like a lot of it is like you have some of it like the parts of it that are semi in lockstep are like the more like kid focused figures and the kid and the I guess nominally more kid focused shows. But like they haven't been like as like in the limelight, right? Like when like in like the 2000s especially and before that as well, like when Beast Wars is the thing, you just have like Beast Wars on the shelves or maybe some exclusives. Whereas nowadays you have like these generations lines which are mostly rehashes of like figures and characters from the past, that have really like nothing to do with like Earthspark or even one to an extent, right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
one toys, but there's not necessarily the same amount, right? And like one has like a million cameos of characters who have like no product on the shelves. And even a character like Arachnid, who was a fairly major character in the movie, barely has a lot going on. Um,
yeah. I'm just thinking like long term now about like what a crazy run we've had this year.
yeah,
Just for the podcast, like what we started with and then ending with Transformers is actually, I will say, probably one of the more positive notes we've ended a year on. So I'm grateful for that.
yeah. I'm trying to think. I don't even remember what we ended last year on.
And I think we did like the Wikipedia like 2023 page and just went through it.
Oh, yeah, that was ass. Like not that the content was ass, but like the what we went through was not great.
I just like again like just to the listener, like you can do that on your own time and feel sad about it, but like I I don't know. I don't know what the general direction is going to be in the coming year. Obviously we want to keep this going, but I think like we're just going to keep changing topics at breakneck speed and I'm okay with that.
I just gotta say, if you make me like live react to the inauguration, I'll kill myself live on air.
The thing especially cuz like, well, don't do that. But
I'm
like
joking, but
I mean the thing is though is like especially like for all the talk we've done this year and years past about like political media, the incentive structure behind it, and like the guided board Society of the Spectacle thesis, right? I don't know if it's gonna serve our listenership or anybody to be yet another podcast that like gets mad at the thing happening.
sure.
Of course, like, we'll probably be doing like our more measured like reporting maybe after the events happen and stuff, but like there's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen that are going to be, if not severely angering, they're going to be extremely depressing, right?
Yeah.
And I think just like what I see the purpose of a podcast being, and I'm trying to think too, like in the coming years, like do I want to explore some of these like more research oriented ideas where we take time and then deliver like something long form in multiple parts? Do we keep doing like what we've been doing, which is working? But I think like the problem with podcasts today and what, and sorry to do this on air, folks. Maybe I'll open the comments for this one. I don't know. Um, is like it's hard to gauge what your impact is going to be, and I kind of feel like podcasts have an upper floor of what their impact could be, especially with a smaller audience. But
Hmm.
also they should be fun, and if you're not having fun, what are we doing? So I'm trying to take all that into practical consideration, but again, like listeners, you got our line. Any suggestions, you're always welcome to throw them down. And I think like again, like with our politics coverage, like there's only so many of these like presidential debates we can watch, right?
Well, we've got plenty of time to wait.
That is true. That is true. But I don't know. It's just like events like the like okay, we live stream the inauguration and then what?
Well,
Like
no, I'm saying we don't live stream the inauguration.
exactly,
That's,
exactly. I'm
I mean,
agreeing with
I
you.
was, joking about the outcome, mostly. I don't intend to watch it live. I mean, I kind of
I
have to watch some of it, but like for my job. But like, I'm not gonna watch that live. Like,
right. I'll watch it after the fact. I especially like the culture of like live reacting to something you're gonna hate. I don't understand that.
yeah, like it's one thing. I mean, like if we wanted to like live react to something that we're gonna hate, like let's just schedule a G Savior episode.
I have
Um,
to.
Like, I mean, I'm not even kidding. Like, I mean, if we're gonna do like if that's what we're gonna do, like at least that would be amusing.
No, you're spot on there. Plus, like I think like Do you remember like in 2016 after like the Trump, or that was 2017, so after the Trump inauguration, like everyone who was protesting or upset or like varying degrees of like cringeworthy responses to the inauguration, like were just like stuff for the right to just eat up as memes. Like there's that like one gif
Maybe
of
that's why no one's protesting this year. No one wants to be. Does anyone know? Like, I'm not even trying to be mean. Does anyone know what happened to like the one like the person that like just burst out in tears? The one that like got on their knees.
that's exactly what I was gonna
Like, because
reference, right?
that is
With
like the meme from that.
right, and
Um,
it's like it just looked performative when I don't know this person. I'm not trying to like make up facts about something I don't know, but it's like the reception to it is like one, it's like entirely performative. So like it looks off, but then also like it's just easily memeable, and like we've talked about this. People like that love watching people get triggered, quote unquote. They
yeah, I mean
love
that's like the only thing that they're like. If you starve them of it, all they're gonna have is hating the people they elected.
exactly, exactly. I mean, I do think people should protest if they get the opportunity, but like, there's definitely nothing to be gained from like, jumping into a cobra pit and getting bit,
Yeah,
because
and I'm still like a mixed perspective on it. Like where it's like, I mean, I know that like like from everything I've read and seen, it seems like whatever protests we're going to get around the inauguration are going to be really small compared to the last time.
I
And
bet,
I'm mixed on
I
what that
bet.
means. You know what I mean? I'm mixed. Like, is that like good because kind of like what we're talking about, or is that like bad because it's just like there's just no fucking energy to like resist anything anymore? As much as like yes, the resist lib culture is cringy and well, I mean, I guess provably ineffective at this point.
Right, and it's like I think that cohort being absent to me is the thing I'm most interested in, because I think like with the conventional organizers and conventional like protest, them being feeling depleted or feeling like this isn't the best use of their time, that makes sense. But the resist libs not showing up is interesting because
Like,
it
what does
kind
it
of
mean?
to me it kind of feels like they know that they've been caught with their pants down, right?
Could be,
Like
yeah.
that's at least the way I'm choosing to read it. But like you're saying, there's no clear way to read it yet, and we'll see.
And I said, I don't think it's like, is it like, are they going to go in with it? And there's a lot of stuff and I think we'll be talking about this throughout like next year, right? Is sort of what is the best way to like build and kind of progress from here, right? Like it's
Yeah,
because I think that there's a lot of discourse surrounding that's helpful and not helpful in different ways, right? I think there's a lot of people who are just kind of willing to kind of hang up the cap and just give up, and then others who are um, not as willing to do that, but also like aren't really like channeling their energy in an effective way. And I think it's fine if I'm not saying I necessarily know the right answer right now either, but like, and it's fine like for people to like not know what that answer is. But I think that that's like the sort of soul searching that needs to happen um, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, right? And that's kind of, I mean, that's something where like I don't know if I would say I'm necessarily looking forward to it in 2025, but I want to be optimistic and have a little bit of like faith that it'll, you know, some positivity will sort of progress in that space. That there will
you
be a more clear strategy that emerges.
you're making complete sense, right? And I think like the thing that keeps me up, so to speak, with that as well as like how do you manage the precarity and increased busyness of modern life as those things are being figured out, because I think that seems to be like the continued refrain. It, like we mentioned, is people find themselves in more precarious positions every day. People find themselves working more. People find themselves more powerless in some ways, and I think something that I feel at least ready to admit, or at least something that like has been fucking me up a bit, is like I don't have the time as much as I used to keep up with everything. I don't have the time to stay as well read or well informed as I used to. So that's something I'm working to correct, but that's something that everybody's struggling with right now. Um,
Right.
and with the Trump years, it's going to get worse as you know the barrage of information is going to accelerate, I guess. But you know
Yeah,
the
and I mean, there's if there's anything that I could guarantee you'll get in 2025 is a barrage of Trump information
yep.
day in and day out. As I said, it's interesting because I said like a lot of my students are young enough where they do not remember that first term, like at least in quite the same context, right? I mean, I know some have benefited from being away from home in the sense that it's allowed them to evolve politically, um, to put it mildly. Um, and I think so like seeing that in a whole new lens too will be interesting, and like it's interesting experiencing that a little vicariously through them a bit. And I'll be the I guess their tormentor for the next few years in terms of knowing every stone that was turned in those first 4 years, which, as I said, for me, and I guess like like one of the things too, like kind of circling back to where we started a bit with this, with kind of the falling apart of manga and whatnot, is like the charm and luster that the media had been giving like Trump as sort of like this like shiny new toy, I think is pretty much gone at this point. I
Yep.
think and that's good because that was like the one thing that I like legitimately could not stand for like the past like month or so, was just like the idea that like we're going to ignore this man was in the office before. Like we're just
Exactly.
gonna pretend we're gonna gaslight you. Uh yeah, like that I could not stand.
And I that's something that it's good you bring that up because like after like the Kamala loss, like I mentioned that like as bad as it feels for that to happen, like I did have this like bad sense of relief in that now we know what we're dealing with, and I couldn't quite bring myself to be worried yet because like I'm not saying that I predicted this. I'm not Emperor Palpatine saying everything I have predicted has come to pass. No, none of that shit. None of that shit. What I'm trying to say
Well, he
is
also
like
designed it that way, so
he
like
also designed it that
hopefully you didn't,
but like I knew that like this wouldn't hold. This alliance with Trump and Musk wouldn't hold. It broke quicker than I could have predicted, but that's exactly why like
To be fair, I don't think it's necessarily the alliance between him. It's the alliance between Musk and like the Trump base.
that too. That exactly, right? So it's like that's why you can't resign to doom immediately. I think like anger, frustration, sadness, like those are all real and should be felt. You should reckon with those feelings, but
Sure.
assuming that any reality is fixed has been kind like that you can't do that. And I think we've learned our lesson on that well before this election, right? I don't think anything is set in stone per se. I think his like we've been saying on the show for a while, history's a live wire, it's a moving process. And in the same way, your life doesn't exist separate from history. It exists within it as like a microcosm of it. So everything you're dealing with, everything you're experiencing within it is downstream from that. Like
Yeah.
it's not twee to think of, the things you're dealing with, your alienation, your precarious situation as downstream from like major political decisions and realities. Though that is happening, right? And I
Mm.
think in this, not to cite our movie as an example here, but you know, Optimus Prime and Megatron didn't become uh world defining figures overnight or when they were born. It kind of was a process of their lives that led them to that moment. So if you feel like you're not powerful enough to make changes, or you feel like you don't understand everything that's going on, or if you don't have everything figured out, that's not a fixed reality. That's just where you're at now. That's still
Sure.
subject to change. And I think the choice is, what are you going to do about it? That's the question. If you don't know what is going to be done about it, what can you do about it is the next answer. And I'm still trying to figure that out, you know?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's like a little wrap up for everything.
Exactly. Well, Josh, thanks for coming on. And thank you, dear listeners, for yet another year. Um, I wish I had something prepared for this. And all I can just say is thank you for being here again. Um, I'm hoping that the next year will be better for everybody. I'm hoping that um, even if the world is out of control, we all find a little more agency, a little more control over ourselves, and that, things work out better this time around.
In the new year, choose whether you want to be Megatron or Optimus Prime and live every day accordingly.
Because none of you are Sentinel. None of you should be.
And if you are, well,
Well,
I'd rather not say.
till all are one. Thanks again, dear listeners, for tuning in. This has been the final episode this year for Greenhouse Gaslighting. We will catch you next year. Take care.